So we swillingly, land upon a new horizon, and this horizon, I guess, is slightly more vivid, maybe a little bit more, hopeful, a little bit more outwardly, outwardly, optimistic, you could put it. But either way, of course, the GBA games, they mark a new era. But of course, this is also a new era for another reason. Of course, as you know, Smash Brothers Melee came out, and that included a couple of FE characters, and those FE characters really, their swords really stuck, a, a fire of interest within the masses of Nintendo games, and people wanted to know what exactly these fiery and frilly, anime swordsmen, had to offer in their own home games. Well, obviously the Binding Blade, it would come out after Melee, but it still wouldn't come out in, out west. But either way, though, it did, sort of shift some of its story and tones to be more accommodating towards the west, I guess you could say still. But regardless, I guess we'll head on in this very momentous moment in history. We open up the game, and there's a telling of yet another conflict between humans and dragons. So that's But regardless of that, of course, we start off with Roy. Roy, the boy, he is a young boy, and of course, that can cause a little bit of complications, as he's not exactly the biggest boy, and he doesn't exactly talk the biggest game either. And point is, he's not exactly the strongest person on his own, but of course, he does have to have other people, carrying him around, and have a crux on the rest of his little army here. But regardless of all that, Roy, his father is very sick. Maybe his father, was doing some stuff that he probably shouldn't have done, and that's why he's in this ghastly state, as you can see right here. But regardless of whatever happened back then, Roy realizes, of course, that the nation of Bern, they're invading, and it looks like Roy is thrust into the chugging engine of fate that deigns to spurn once again. But regardless, of course, Roy and friends, they get and they save Roy's little friend, Lilina, and of course they realize that they need to go over to Ostia and do some stuff over there. But regardless of that, Roy, he's an interesting little fellow. He doesn't have, I guess, the most distinct personality ever, but he's humble enough, I guess, and he does what he believes is right, and ultimately he does do his best to try to help people, and I guess those are all the necessary requirements for a lord in this series. But regardless of that, Roy, of course, he meets Guinevere after fighting a few more soldiers trying to sell her off. But regardless of that, Guinevere, of course, she is the sister of Zephiel, King Zephiel of Bern, who was instigating the war, and apparently Zephiel, of course, wants to liberate the world in some relative capacity. But regardless of that, Guinevere, I guess she has to do something due to her position of power, and whatever that something may lead to, who knows, but it is interesting, I guess. As we learn later on, of course, Zephiel, he wants to give the world back to the dragons, because, of course, apparently the humans, they attacked first, seemingly, and they drove the dragons out of Alib, and, I guess Zephiel, in some relative retrospect, wants to give the world back to the dragons, and, he's the one who, is the main source of power. He's the main driving force in this war, instead of a dragon themselves, like Medius or Loptus and stuff like that. So I guess there is a role reversal, which is slightly interesting. But of course, the Scouring, the great war between humans and dragons, happened a while ago, and why would he want to give, the continent back to the dragons after all this time, when, why would he specifically choose to side with dragons over humans at all? Well, he does give his own reason. Of course, here, I guess we can look at the humans that we do see in this game and see whether or not they would seemingly be worthy of being eliminated, so to speak. Of course, there are the lords on the Western Isles who obviously send people they capture and stuff like that to the mines to work there, work them to the bone. Practically, of course, forced labor, slaves, whatever you want to call it. But regardless, of course, Roy does realize that, and realize, of course, that he has to do what he can while he's on the Western Isles to save all the slaves. So that's good. But as for other types of people on the continent, there's also they seem to like to flock to power, or at least where they perceive the power to be, like of course Segun up in Ilia and stuff, and of course the Diju clan in Sakai, but also of course Eric of Laos, who decides to scour out and completely sell his soul out, just for I guess a little bit of resentment he might have felt towards Eliwood. But regardless of that, there's also the fact, of course, Ricardo and Roarts, who obviously partially oversee the forced labor in the Western Isles, but also they decide to sign up with Burden because they're of course more powerful, and they perceive themselves as very, very above everyone else, and see potential gains either by more status, more renown, or more potential money in the future. That's why they're choosing to pretty much do this stuff, and of course, Roy and friends put them in their place very, very satisfyingly. But regardless of that, it appears, there's also, of course, the cutthroats, the thieves, a number of other people who make, I guess, life difficult for the average person, as you would put it. But of course, that's just more standard human stuff. But regardless, is all of this necessarily worth trying to get rid of humans on this continent? I don't know. For one, of course, there is the fact that, the general idea that Roy visits a lot more, kind villagers and stuff like that. The villagers are pretty helpful and, pretty sprightly, and, compared to previous Fire Emblem games, I would say, except for some of the cult-like, Law of Sakai people that you talk to over there. But regardless of all that, there's also, of course, the good things that the humans generally do, like, of course, Lolina, telling Gonzalez, he's not necessarily a monster, even though he very much looks like a goblin, so to speak, and people really tend to not like that. And I guess that more just shows that people in Elite, while they may not necessarily be the worst people out there, they are still humans, and I guess there's reason enough why Zephiel would get mad and believe that the dragon should have won instead of the humans. And also the village of Arcadia, which should be a relatively positive thing, at least from Zephiel's point of view. But either way, of course, Zephiel, the reason why he wants humans, I guess, wants to give the continents back to dragons, is simply because, I guess, the dragons on this continent are not succumbing to petty emotions, which Zephiel cites as the main reason as to why he despises humans, at least formally, that is. And petty emotions, stuff such as jealousy and envy, whatever you want to call it. Obviously that was a main reason as to why his father, tried to assassinate him, I guess. Zephiel was always very bright, very talented, and very studious, I guess you can say, as well as good with the sword as well, and that caused his father, King Desmond of Bern, to be quite envious, and also the fact that, of course, obviously it was a different wife that helped create Zephiel, of course, and obviously the king was just the king wasn't happy that it wasn't a full-blooded person from Bern that was set to overtake his throne. So of course he tried to put poison in Zephiel's drink, and that worked in neutralizing Zephiel for a good little bit there. But ultimately Zephiel, realizing, I guess, a powerful swath of emotions, obviously he eventually had to come to the point where the two very the very sullen emotions, the very different viewpoints of how things should be with King Desmond and Zephiel came together, and ultimately Zephiel took actions into his own hands and partially faked his death, and then once they were set to bury him, of course, he murdered Desmond, who was about to, I guess, spit on his coffin, so to speak, in a sense. And then, of course, Zephiel turns the tables completely on him, puts a sword through him, and yeah, that is that. Yeah, petty emotions, there are a number of things, humans can get, very mad about over, pretty superfluous or, pretty arduous things, like, of course, not closing the gate the correct way, or stepping, a bit too far into someone's property, so to speak, stepping, 2 feet in. Of course, there's also, people getting mad at certain imagery, like gang signs, the bird, and other such with, and of course, stuff like being 2 minutes late to job or class or whatever, and a number of different, things like that can, cause humans to, be sent into a frenzy for seemingly nothing. But regardless of that, obviously Zephiel, at least he cites petty emotions, specifically more so, of course, jealousy. I mean, obviously that one makes sense. It is somewhat, petty in nature to act upon jealousy, but either way, of course, greed. There's also, greed, of course, humans, they can build stuff. They can also, pick up and take stuff very easily. Humans are, of course, possessive by nature, and the fact that they realize they can, hoard a lot of different things. Some of them, of course, many humans have a natural form of greed, and some, seek to only gain as much as possible, at least as much as they see, themselves being able to hold, as you would put it. But of course, Zephiel also cites hatred as a petty emotion, which I do find odd. Hatred, it's something that is generally built up over time. It's something that it's not simply something that you acquire on a whim, but of course, hatred, it can, spew out in a number of different ways, some of which can seem a bit shallow or unfounded, but either way, of course, hatred, it can be broad over country-wides and stuff like that, or it can simply be, I guess, more of a sullen, more of a, a stalking vendetta, if you will. It's a much more, much more intricate beast, hatred can be. But regardless of why or why not genuine hatred does exist, I wouldn't exactly describe it as something that is petty, or simply, something that, just simply is a mistake, or something that just has to be taken care of, like the rest of everything else, as you would say. But either way, of course, Zephiel, he views all of that as, I guess, petty in a sense, and yeah, he wants to get rid of it somehow. I don't know exactly what he plans to do once he supposedly gives the world back to the dragons. Where's he gonna go? Is he gonna take his own life? What about Guinevere? He clearly showed he had some compassion with her, and yeah, there's clearly some other things that that he would have to look forward to, some other things that he would have to like in order to tolerate, living in a world with dragons, if he did want to keep himself alive. But ultimately, we don't know. And either way, though, Zephiel, as he describes, the dragons are not, succumb to these petty emotions, so to speak. They actually have, I guess, a more stout reasoning, or a stout reason for doing things, so to speak. And they're not just gonna, let any little emotion, jealousy, any little weird whim, dictate their actions, or let, their reputation or their, social standing dictate how they live their lives, so to speak. But let's hear it from the dragon himself. Obviously, in chapter 24, you meet Jean, who is a dragon who used to live in Alib, and yeah, apparently he spills all about how he basically took a divine dragon. The dragons, captured a divine dragon who hesitated, and ultimately they destroyed it. He done its will and made the dragon a soulless beast who purely exists to create other dragons that are also soulless beasts that only know killing and savagery, I guess you could call it. Yeah, the divine dragons decided to leave to some other world, I guess, and but one divine dragon, of course, hesitated for a bit. Obviously, the divine dragons wanted nothing to do with the war against the divine dragons and the humans, and ultimately, though, I guess, he had a little bit of a moment of some level of compassion, at least on some side of the conflict, but ultimately her hesitation cost her in the end, and the dragons that ended up capturing her, turning her into a soulless beast. It is an interesting dilemma, I guess, mainly the fact that dragons here appear to be very cold, heartless, and more calculating, I guess, than what we would typically expect of them. I mean, obviously Jean says, stuff like pity and hesitation and stuff like that. He views those as, worthless, emotions, since they don't help, him survive or help, his race survive, apparently. And, I guess Jean he's more than willing to do something, I guess, more objective in order to, ultimately have his race survive. But regardless of that, it is still interesting that the dragons come off as more cold and calculating here, while the humans come off as definitely quite a bit more compassionate. And of course, Hartmut, the original wielder of the Binding Blade, obviously chose to seal Idun inside the Binding Blade instead of killing Idun. I guess because he saw something, in Idun that was worth saving, and ultimately he felt bad in some retrospect and decided to give her a better rest rather than the afterlife. But of course, it's still weird, obviously, that Jean is so willing to converse with Roy and tell him all the history and stuff like that. And even though Roy, being a human and being supposedly descended from people who helped, nearly, slaughter his race back in the day for whatever reason or something with, and it's just, John does seem to be very emotionally disconnected, and, he doesn't really show much of anything in terms of any proper, sort of emotion. It's just kind of, there's a lot of weirdness involved in this, and obviously there's still the idea of why, humans decided to attack dragons in the first place. There's no concrete reason, but still, it felt like maybe the humans might have felt threatened. The dragons here do seem to be, again, a little bit calculating in some respect, and who knows if the humans, decided on a whim, they wanted to protect their own race, or they thought the dragons might, come to oppress them, quite a bit later on. Either way, though, the humans, when they attacked first and caused, eventually ended up causing, a very, very, very large-scale war that ended up releasing lots of power. And of course, with the legendary weapons being created and the dragons also fighting, ultimately resulting, in massive amounts of powers being released, resulting in the ending winter, where the laws of everything, changed, essentially. The earth that they grew up on, was suddenly, unrecognizable for a time. Everything was unclear, everything was abyss, crystallized, as you would put it. But the way it's clear, John and some of his, dragon brethren were not exactly the greatest of beings, but regardless of all that, humans, of course, they still decided to target another race of beings, and of course, hatred can definitely, preside from that, true hatred, that is. But regardless of, the feelings of other dragons, or, what exactly, caused, such great powers, such as, ones that created the ending winter. Either way, though, it's very clear that, the environment was clearly very unstable between the two races, and ultimately, they created an extremely large rift here in Alib between, of course, humans and dragons, and that will only lead to more wars and more more pretty bad stuff ultimately in the future. But I guess Zephiel took the perspective of trying to end, all this all these back and forth warrings and the back and forth power struggles and all of the madness that came with it, and ultimately tried to give the dragons, who were clearly more powerful than the humans individually, he tried to give the continent back to them. But either way, it appears the dragons, they simply could not last in Alib for much long anyways. It seems fate had another course for them, whether they liked it or not. And Zephiel says the dragon should have won, and it appears in terms of just, seemingly the pure amount of power that the dragons had compared to the humans, that, maybe probably would have been, the easy bet. But of course, the dragons, they did well at first in the war, but of course the humans, they multiplied, they reproduced much quicker than the dragons, and obviously the dragons, they took Idun. Idun made a mistake and ultimately got captured, turned into the demon dragon, and ultimately, the numbers advantage started to turn, against, back in the favor of the dragons. But of course, ultimately, the dragons still end up losing. Of course, partially thanks to, the legendary weapons. But there was just so much unforeseen power that the legendary weapons were able to create, and all the other humans that fought alongside them, ultimately it ended up causing so much chaos that things ultimately blew up in everyone's face. And regardless, that is interesting. Of course, humans, how they managed to create such incredible weaponry, who knows, maybe they had a good idea, maybe they had the right people, the right scholars, the right minds, the right amount of craftsmanship knowledge and stuff like that. But even still, to create that much power, that much force to nearly completely change the laws of the universe as everyone knew it, those still must be fairly powerful weapons in their own right. And very likely the humans got some external help from somewhere. Where that somewhere is, I don't know exactly, but either way, of course, the humans or the dragons wouldn't wanted to, of course, have created a world where the laws of physics were completely reversed and stuff, and the seasons changed on a whim, and everything was isolated, desolate, distorted, whatever you want to call it. And it appears some third party in the war may or may not have influenced how this how the ending winter came to be. But so Zephiel views it all as a mistake. Of course, the all the years of human history, all those blood, sweat, and tears, all of the alien struggles of the frozen tundra, and all those mercenary contracts, the betrayals, of course, all the happenings and goings-ons in the town, all of the relationships that the villagers built with each other, as well as the relationships they had with the people that helped them, like Roy and friends and all that, and of course the other types of relationships, stuff like Noah and Fur, Roy and Cecilia, and various other relationships, like of course Percival and Prince Myrddin here, all of that stuff, and a little bit extra. All of it was apparently a mistake, simply because the dragon should have won the war. And Zephiel views this as a justifiable reason to pretty much slaughter the entire human race on Alib. Then I think he doesn't have quite what it takes to actually do it based on that logic alone. Let's just say that. Roy and friends, I think, are well within their rights to take Zephiel out once and for all, and not in a somber way at all. But regardless, Zephiel, of course, he did go through a lot, and it's not like, of course, humans, cannot cause atrocities and everything that they do, even if someone views it as a simple or minor thing. Obviously humans can ultimately have a much greater, more devastating long-term impact on a continent or anything in general. But obviously Zephiel, he tried to put everyone under the same blanket, and it just doesn't work, of course, in this context. Yeah, talking about, I guess, legendary weapons now. Yeah, they're pretty out there, I guess. Of course, we have the big Durandal, the Blazing Blade. Yeah, it could be practical if used, in line with your shoulders and stuff, and used as a counterweight to to a diagonal, types of movement and stuff like that. Those types of sword slashes. Garm, I mean, yeah, you'd have to be extremely, built in order to use it, but slightly, like maybe 3 times wider, and maybe have a couple of lean inches on on a height. But regardless, yeah, it's a pretty nice axe. The bow of the winds, the Muligir. I mean, arrows, they follow the wind, they are dictated by it. And, they are dynamic as the wind as ever, and the wind goes where the wind pleases to go, and it always goes in a solitary fashion. It always has its own path forward, so that's pretty cool. There's the Frozen Lance Malte. You have a rock hard will, and you have a very very hard but hollow lance, and sometimes hollow weapons can hurt a little bit more than dense weapons. That is a true thing. But either way, of course, Forblaze, the Infernal Truth. It's the Infernal Truth. That's pretty crazy. Aureola, the Glorious Ascension. Apparently, someone is ascending to a higher plane of being, and they apparently feel really good right now. So, who wouldn't want to be, ascended over, everyone else? I mean, that's just obviously a very, very good feeling. There's nothing. It's crazy. Apocalypse, convening with the darkness to learn some unique secrets, but giving up yourself in order to achieve those secrets. That is absolutely wild. And of course, the Binding Blade, which is a blade that does oppress people in a sense. But either way, though, that's neither here nor there. So I guess this game's body of work, it's a little bit nicer, I guess you could say. Of course, I haven't mentioned the fact that there are support conversations in this game. That's new to this game. Obviously, there were talk conversations in previous games, but yeah, obviously supports to add an extra layer, an extra dynamic and stuff, and they are pretty cool in a literal sense. Yeah, the characters of this game, of course, there's the Shire ones like Dorothy, Gonzalez and stuff. I don't think Shin is necessarily shy. He's just kind of a drifter, I guess you can say. But yeah, there's also characters that are also, I guess, lofty. I guess Saul, he believes everyone serves God in some way or something to that effect, and of course Sue, who believes Mother Earth or Father Sky dictates her every action, or at least gives her enough strength to go out and fight and stuff. And but regardless, most of the characters are fairly reasonable and fun, and some of them are fairly fun in their own ways. But of course, I do like, I guess, the most Kath. Kath, of course, meets with Roy multiple times, and obviously each time she's running off with some loot in a castle or someone's manor, and she's obviously someone who steals from the rich and wants to get back to poor communities while the war is raging on, of course. But of course, Roy, he believes that stealing is wrong, and that Kath simply should not do it. And doesn't like bowing down to power. And of course, seemingly a few years ago, our father burned down the village, just to protect Kath and everyone. And obviously, Kath, she didn't really like that whole ordeal. Thought her father, made a pretty bad decision, but ultimately, she can see some of the good in it, and ultimately, yeah, obviously Kath, steals, just to help people and stuff in need. And obviously Roy, he thinks it's just, a simple affair of, us defeating the bad guys, and then once the war is over, things will, hopefully turn back to normal and stuff. But of course, as you know, some lords are lecherous, treacherous, and stuff like that, and they'll do anything to, save their own skin, or, of course, gain the material wealth, and that is ultimately what caused, Cass Village to be burned down in the first place. But either way, of course, Roy, he doesn't really know what to say after hearing all of Kath's story, but eventually he comes to some realizations. He still doesn't want Kath to steal, but ultimately he has to prove to Kath that, he and his cause is worthy enough, and that ultimately, none of this lecherous stuff has to be necessary in the future. And ultimately, Kath, having a bit of a soft spot for people who are willing to grow, I guess she's willing to join Roy's army. But regardless of that, yeah, she's not super strong, and I think Roy also kind of has a little bit of a thing for her and kind of wants to protect her personally. But regardless of that, that's I guess a main rundown of the characters. I guess, though, there is one character that we haven't really talked about much, in terms of their actual personality, which is important because they're the main character, and that's Roy, of course. Roy does not seem to have any super discernible, main character traits. Obviously, he does have a very slight amount of growth, learning about, his past and all the tragedies and stuff like that, and, making tough decisions about, whether or not to save the slaves on the Western Isles, or whether or not to go back and, defend Etruria, defend, General Cecilia and stuff like that, and potentially his entire country. But obviously, Roy, though, he kind of just does what he's supposed to do, I guess you could say, and lead his nation to victory. And you don't really see much more of him than that. He's just kind of along for the ride, which is interesting. Obviously, all of his friends and stuff help him out a ton, and of course, Roy, he's very weak for most of the game until the very end, and that is certainly interesting. Is he actually a genuinely good person? I mean, or is he kind of just doing what he's supposed to? Does he have an idea of what the future holds for Alib, in regards to Arcadia and the relationship for humans and dragons? I mean, obviously he does have plenty of compassion, showing, choosing to spare Edan in the final chapter, and maybe there is some solace in that, but it doesn't look like Roy himself is gonna, do much in terms of leading Alib to a bright future, and that'll mostly be on the backs of Edan, the people of Nabata, and of course anyone else who's willing to tussle. But either way, though, that's pretty much all there is to say for the Binding Blade for now. So we're gonna make the FE7 video next, and then we'll do, I guess, a combined video of FE6 and 7, talking about the main themes and the music and stuff like that. So, yeah. What I want to mention is, during the ending winter, the dragons, when, everything was warping, the world was rapidly changing and everything. Apparently, the dragons can no longer maintain their dragon form, and, realizing that the human form took the least amount of energy to be in, that's pretty much how Manichetes were created, of course, and that's certainly interesting that suddenly, out of all the forms that one could take, that the human form is the one that is the most optimal in the current world of Alib, which is certainly something. But either way, of course, despite that, of course, how intriguing that is in a certain sense. Of course, I guess the biggest thing in regards to the overarching story of Fire Emblem is the fact that obviously humans and dragons, when they clashed during the Scouring, Of course, a vast amount of energy was released, which caused the end of winter, and of course, the fact that ordinarily humans and dragons wouldn't be able to, wouldn't have been able to create that much energy, and that there was likely some interference somewhere between, the two, and that ended up creating a mess. And I guess that's the biggest thing, to keep in mind as we go forward in this series as a whole. But yep.